Welcome to the BeTempered podcast, where we explore the art of finding balance in a chaotic world. Join us as we delve into insightful conversations, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you navigate life's ups and downs with grace and resilience. I'm your host, Dan Schmidt, and together let's embark on a journey to live our best lives. This is BeTempered.
I'm just here for my good books.
Even though this is pretty much give him a scarf and some glasses, and he's good for the sidecar game.
So which one am I supposed to go to?
Yeah, both.
Just grab it. Just grab it. All right. Well, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the BeTempered podcast. We're excited today to have Father David Doseck with us, coming all the way up from Cincinnati, Ohio.
That's correct.
And we're going to hear David's story, growing up, his childhood, his journey to the priesthood. I know we have some listeners who are of the Catholic faith, and I know we have a lot of listeners who are not. So I'm sure there's people out there that have a lot of questions that you might be able to expand upon with your journey to the faith. And we're excited to hear that. So welcome.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ben. Hey.
Yeah.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah,
Good to see you too. Nice meeting you.
Absolutely. First time I've heard the podcast a few times. Dan sent me a few of them, and he said, "Yeah, there's this guy Ben with me." And I hear the voice. It's a radio voice. And
it
now
is.
I see it.
Yeah.
It's even more a radio voice. It's wonderful. Thanks.
Just not a broadcasting face. So.
There you go. No.
That's why it's a podcast and not a TV commercial, right?
So we always laugh in the Catholic world, going through the storms right now and really rising in popularity. So pray for him, because whenever there's popularity in Christianity, there's more attacks and doubts and things like that. But Father Mike Schmitz, he's just a wonderful evangelist up in Minnesota, but he has a face for video. And so I always crack up whenever we host like retreats or this, and we'll put a video of Father Mike. I don't think there's a single woman in the room that isn't perhaps paying attention to the movie. So it's a wonderful way to evangelize.
Yeah.
He works out, he does CrossFit, he's very athletic, and he's got that chiseled bone structure. So I'm like, good for him. The rest of us, well, they'll pass on the video maybe. That's okay.
Yeah.
All for the glory of God. So
well, and Father Mike Schmitz has a very popular podcast.
Yeah.
The Bible in a Year podcast is
still number one. I think.
Yeah. So that's very unique, and he's got a good podcast voice as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So good. So obviously, I've known you now for, I don't know when did you come to Preble?
5 years.
Has it been 5?
5 years.
5 years. But if I didn't know you and I just met you, tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your journey.
Yeah, sure. I was born in 1989, and Mom and Dad, John and Teresa Doseck, and they grew up in a small rural area. Dad actually grew up in Botkins, Ohio, and then my mother grew up in Sydney, Ohio. They met at a kind of a faith night when they were just out of college, in college, around 19 years old, 20 years old. 6 months later, they got married, and then they had 5 kids. So I'm the fourth of 5, and then we were born and raised in the house right next to where my dad grew up. Okay. The house went on sheriff's auction when my mom and him were dating. It was amazing. They had a faith gathering. I learned this from Mom. They had a faith gathering night at my home, and my mom said, "Well, it was a nice house. It was good. Here's this young man, John. He's got his new home or whatever. Okay, well, that's pretty bold for a 19-year-old guy to get his own house or whatever." And then, lo and behold, this is the house that now she lives in, and now being a widow, she lives there, and it's been there for, she's 65, so 40 years of her life.
And that's your home. I mean, that's where you grew up.
Correct. Grew up in Botkins and went to K through 12 school, all there in one building. So it was a small town, small community. That's typical of kind of this Northwest kind of Ohio feel. And so grew up there. we were born and raised and baptized as Catholics. Dad always had a great devotion to Catholicism from his parents and grandparents. Goes all the way back to probably being immigrants here in the United States, German farming immigrants in the St. Mary's area, up by Grand Lake St. Mary's. That area is some of my family relatives. And then my mother, she was Baptist. So my mother was Baptist until she met my father. And then for her, it was the whole idea of communion and a relationship with Jesus. So for some who don't believe, like the bread and the wine, we believe it becomes the body and blood of Jesus. And for the Baptists, they did communion, I guess, once a month, something like that, typical. And for her, it was a similar belief for her, which was, I believe this is Jesus. I believe this is Jesus. And the more and more she dove into a Baptist kind of formal teaching of what they actually believe happens in that moment, it was symbolic for them. And that's what I think a lot of people, believe. It's symbolic of the Last Supper. It's a symbolic of that sacrifice. And she said, but I really believe it is him. And then she started to see, at least going with my dad to church, they do this every day as Catholics because that is the body of Jesus. And then they have a reverence for it after it turns into the body and blood. They keep it in a special place, a tabernacle, a box, decorated well. And so it was like, it just attracted my mother of where her heart was. Now Catholicism was saying and confirming kind of those ideas in her heart. But it was a big step for her. Yeah, many things with her family. So, being Baptist, there's a lot of risk and there was some fallout from that because of becoming Catholic.
Yeah.
But Mom and Dad raised us in the Catholic faith. Most importantly was reading the Bible, and Dad always did that in the morning. He had his own time with God. And then Mom would always be there instructing us and guiding us and getting us to kind of religious faith formation, Bible schools and stuff. And then the bigger one was we always prayed together at night. That was
as a family,
a non-negotiable, And I remember even going out as a young boy, and Mom would say, "Get Dad." And Dad was a mechanic, so he's an electrician in the daytime, and then he came home and he'd be in the garage working on cars. And so we'd always go out and say, "Dad, it's time to pray." And he'd put down his work and he'd come in and he'd pray with us. Mom would complain he smells like gasoline or oil or whatever. But we'd all kneel down and on the sofas in the living room, we would just bend our knees and do all of our usual rote prayers that we have. And then we'd open it up for petitions. And typically younger kids, you're just like impatient, trying to wait, flopping around the couch, doing whatever you need. But then eventually it came to the moment that even in high school, I saw my brothers and sisters and even myself. It was like, okay, this is not just a thing, it's actually a part of life.
Yeah.
And I've always enjoyed that, and I think it's expanded in my life. But that's a little bit about kind of my childhood, a little bit, some background.
Yeah, so growing up in a faith-filled house, a lot of siblings, but you're still a kid. You're trying to figure life out. You're going to Botkins schools, which is a small school. What was your graduating class? Do you remember?
53.
53.
I think we were the largest class in 30 years or something like that. I think that's what it was. Yeah, we take pride in that.
Yeah, so you've got this great faith formation growing up. You get into high school, your body's changing, your mind's changing. Were you just always strong in your faith, or what was your journey like as you matured into a young adult?
Yeah, obviously with that upbringing and family background, it was solid support system and regular intervals of, intervention, positive as well as, kind of constructive criticism along the way with parenting. So I'm really grateful for that. Probably not at the time, but very grateful for that.
Yeah.
I think my mom can attest to that.
Yeah.
That I have quite a mouth on me, so that could be a good or bad. And so once it turned kind of 7th, 8th grade, I say 8th grade is when I really started to seek the things of the world more than the things of the Lord and the things that are above. And my eyes and my heart and my mind started to focus on kind of lowly earthly things, whether it be pleasure, fame, fortune, the usual, quote, temptations that we see in Greek mythology, Roman mythology. And, at that moment in time, it was just fun.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was enjoyable. It allowed me a freedom where I didn't have to care about anybody or anything. Versus a Christianity always had this responsibility to it, a weight to it, of a gift that needed to be given and received. And so at that moment in my life, with a lot of the changes, body, mind, heart, and opportunities, where I saw my other friends who maybe didn't have as much support, or a family that would pray, or a brokenness, in whatever form or shape, they were seeking things in the world just like I was. And so, we'd go to parties in 8th grade and freshman, and the little lies of not telling the parents everything and trying to hide it even though they already know.
Yeah.
As I found out later in life.
Yeah.
And so doing those things, it was just, the best way I can describe it is, I was just slowly drifting or walking away from the Lord, even though I went to church every Sunday, even though I read the Bible. It was just like my heart was being drawn somewhere else, and I didn't quite know how to understand that at that age. And so I just kept on trying to seek more of the dopamine rush and the hit from these experiences at parties and using different substances and again hiding it because I knew if I had to admit it, then I'd have to be responsible. But if I could just have this ulterior life and still be on Sunday, well, okay. And then I'm really blessed because my mother saw that, and she just kind of called me out on the carpet about it. And she does so with maybe she just signed me up for a summer retreat. I needed to go to a church camp, and so for Catholics it was out at a monastery.
Were you excited about it?
Not at all. No. Not at all. I mean, it was there. It was there, and I knew that my life was going in a direction, and I knew that deep down. I just didn't know how to speak for myself, more or less. And so my mother stepped in there. They obviously paid the bill. Was very helpful, and I was going there just to, I don't know, prove things wrong.
Right.
Prove that this life of faith or this life of responsibility is just a gimmick, and I can keep doing whatever I want to do and increase that type of fun without any responsibility. So, I went to this retreat thinking those things, trying to prove this wrong, and I think maybe even prove my mom wrong, And so here I go, okay, I tried to get out of it. Nope, I'm going. So I go to the retreat, and it was the first time in my life where I met young people my age who had a joy and desired the things above, and just beauty, goodness, truth, and they had a happiness and a freedom that I couldn't find in any of the substances or fun experiences that I had. So it kind of burst my bubble that being responsible is a burden, It was like, it's going to weigh you down too much. The cross is too heavy. Mm-hmm. It's not worth it. And the reality is like, they have a joy. What is going on, and why are they? Because they got the same experiences I'm having, same changes, same friends, different, obviously, locations in the United States at this retreat center. But we all came together, and really it was about their relationship with the Lord, and in the Eucharist, so they had quiet time for prayer. As a freshman in high school, I was like going from one thing, next practice, baseball, soccer, I got to keep up with this, it was the advent of AOL messaging, and all that stuff. Sorry, maybe dating a little bit, like, what is that? But it was just like, that was the world, and how we are like just moving quicker and quicker in the pace, and to slow down and actually reflect, or slow down and actually seek something or someone that knows everything. This kind of, if you will, a presence, an all-powerful being. That's what we know is to be God. And I just kind of forgot to actually seek, to actually reflect, and actually think, where's my life in a trajectory here? Because I was just going from the next thing to the next thing. And so in order to be able to receive that gift, that joy, there was a lady in my group, my small group there at the retreat, and she just said, you gotta go to confession, more or less, for Catholics, I mean, you gotta be forgiven. You gotta own up to what you've done, and you gotta renew your heart and your mind. And so I was just floored that she was that forthcoming.
Yeah.
It was like an angel. If I look back, like, yeah, she needed to be there in that moment. And so, I did go to confession that night, and it was just the reality of being there with the priest, letting everything out, confess your sins to one another and be forgiven. And so that priest is there as a representative of God and the church, and there's this confessional seal that whatever you say there, never spoken of again by a priest in his life. Even the courts in the United States, they can't subpoena you.
Right.
There's a religious protection there. And so it has that sacred space where it's just that. And so, I was honest. I did everything that I needed to say. But there was a moment in the confession, I was just not being attentive. And I really didn't know how to love people. And this priest just spoke to me like a father and asked me good questions of why I was seeking what I was seeking in all the things in 8th grade and freshman year in my relationships. And the reality was I was just trying to cover up some of my own needs and my own weaknesses by using others and using these things. And he just called me to a greater life of freedom is actually for something. It's not just from something.
Yeah.
It's for something, and it's for the Lord and for others, the great commandment. And so he just spoke to me like a father, and I just remember looking up in that moment when, the words of absolution, I absolve you from your sins. And I just remember visibly and tangibly knowing that is Jesus forgiving me in this moment and setting my life on a new trajectory. And it was through this ministry of this priest in that moment. So I come back from that retreat. I have to admit that my mom was right. That's always the worst, right? Yeah, you're right. Or, so I'm like, okay. And I'm sure mom and dad, as I look back, they're like, what happened?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't happen when you go on a retreat. Usually it's a slow process.
So you came back as a changed kid.
Man, yeah. And I didn't go to any of those parties anymore, and I focused my life on Christ and started reading the scriptures more from a living relationship than a ulterior life. But everything was part and parcel. It didn't change overnight. There, many decisions were there, but there's a lot of effects of sin that people, it's just habits and patterns that, even still to this day,
Yeah.
we're always, cultivating a life of virtue, a life of grace, and to be more receptive to it. But then I started volunteering in the church and getting different positions and helping out. I even became a custodian at the local parish there that I grew up in for the last 4 years. And so, again, it created that time for stepping back and praying a little bit. Nothing like mopping the floors of church and there's no one in there but Jesus and you.
Right.
And it's just like it was a quiet time to just pray and think. And so I always thought, I was called to be married, have kids, and have a family, like all my brothers and sisters, they got that. But then I started hearing the Lord invite me even more and more as I went on a few dates or had some relationships with high school, in small town. And it's just like the love that I felt and I knew from that priest in that moment of grace was more powerful than any date that I had gone on after that. And don't get me wrong, there's wonderful ladies, wonderful stories, wonderful, opportunities, and could really see myself marrying a number of them throughout my life. But the love that God showed me through being a priest, there was something more there. And I had to discover, why would he show me that if there wasn't a purpose to it? Mm-hmm. I thought maybe be a better dad, a better father of my, physical family and biological family. Maybe that's it. That's why. So I really went to college seminary in Columbus to figure that question out. Why would God do that? And I knew as a 19-year-old guy, if I went to any other university, I definitely would have gone down the other path again and lost probably a lot of the progress I had made because the temptation and discovery at that time is so high.
Yeah.
And so I was blessed to go to college seminary where it was kind of like a military format and very instructional. Only guys, we're all there at the seminary and reading and studying philosophy and liberal arts, which now that I look back is just such a blessing because, nobody ever wants to go into their first class as a freshman and be like, we're going to go over symbolic logic. If Q, then P. If P, then Q. What does that result in? Okay, and that's what we did. We literally did that. And I'm just so grateful because they created us how to think. Not a specific training or a specific model or an agenda or a bias, but simply if you can take any research or any opportunity, think through it. What's their premise? What's their point? What's their conclusion? And so, it's just very helpful with that. And looking at philosophy throughout the centuries, whether influenced by Christianity or other religions or other experiences, you just see that every human person is created for something more.
Yeah.
Like thought itself just provides that. We're so unique, unlike the animals and other things.
Right.
Certain animals, they have a higher rational capability, but nothing in comparison to a human being. And it's just fascinating. From the moment of birth, a child, you can look and say, that's significantly different because of the development that takes place. And so, just being blessed with those studies and the hard timelines to get in before bed and wake up in the morning to do prayer, it really created a habit and routine that allowed my body, heart, and mind to be open to answering that question. Why was that love there? And truly, over 10 years of discernment and study, with bachelor's degree and then master's degree in theology and things, but the 10 years of formation with brothers in the seminary and all of us becoming priests one day, or they would leave and go become fathers of their own families.
Sure.
But to have that group where we're all striving for the same thing and to grow in virtue and to just answer the question, what is God asking of us at this moment in our lives, and how do we respond to it with our full heart? So I was really blessed to have those experiences.
Yeah. So I want to back up a little bit.
Sure.
So when you're in high school, you're getting ready to graduate, and you're trying to make that decision. Were there other schools you were looking at, other opportunities?
Yeah, sure,
and so why did you not go that other route? I mean, I think deep down in your heart you knew what was best for you, but talk about maybe some other opportunities you may have had at a different school and why you decided not to do that.
Yeah, I always say God always has been a blessed relationship in my life. He's very clear, mostly because I'm very thick-headed. So He's got to be pretty clear, and He does so in the gentlest of ways. I had 3 schools that I was looking at, and they were going to be, Catholic schools. I knew that something in ministry, something along these lines. So Lourdes College up in Toledo, I had gotten a half scholarship to go up there and to potentially learn how to do elementary school teaching, or catechetics as we call it, kind of teaching a catechism, and learn from that school. And I also applied at Steubenville, at Franciscan University in Steubenville, which has been known for its Catholic, passionately Catholic and academic excellence. So I went over there, and I played baseball. They were going to give me a scholarship to play baseball there. But it was fascinating at Franciscan University. So I had that, and then I had my third application, which was to the seminary, and to begin studies to discern the priesthood with the Archdiocese of Cincinnati.
Okay.
But I went to Franciscan University, and I sat down, and every one of my other friends that went there that I came to know, because I did a little research, they're like, yeah, no problem, financial aid, they'll come in, they'll help you out, they'll do what they can. Yeah, you're a prime candidate, you pray, you love the Lord, you're just going to do awesome there, no problem. I go in there, walk into the admin office with my mom and dad. I think, it was mom and dad. And they sit down right away, and they got my paperwork. I submitted everything beforehand, and they said, you're not going to be able to afford this school. And that's no knock on Franciscan.
Sure.
It might have, maybe the recruiter had a bad day or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't hold it against them. But as I look back, Lourdes and Franciscan were, in my heart and my mind, the way by which I could get out of being in a formation to be a priest.
Okay.
Because I still had an openness to marriage and an openness to priesthood, where we don't, Catholic priests don't have, are not married and don't have children, biological children. So, I was sitting there and I was like, I just don't know at 19 years old.
Yeah.
If I have enough experience dating, I've only been in a small town, all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't know. So if I go here, it's still Catholic. I can still go to the seminary if I want to eventually later. But, basically like the Lord's thing, that degree went away. And then at Franciscan, I wasn't going to be able to afford it.
Yeah.
So I said, well, heck, let's go to the seminary then, right? Let's go to the seminary and figure this out. And so, that's how I found myself there. So I still was kind of leaving my options open, and if you will, those two applications were kind of my way of saying, like, that's a big commitment to be a priest. I'd like to have a little softer landing and figure it out again my way.
Yeah.
My way.
Yeah.
And then when it came to the seminary, and after the first month there, it was just like, this fits. There were many aspects that I just didn't like. The military tone of things.
Yeah.
But there's so many things that as a 19-year-old man, I look back and I'm like, gosh, I don't know if I would have maybe even remained Catholic if I didn't have that structure, that support, and what I would say is the best of community and brotherhood that developed through different projects. And we were all trying to just figure out what the Lord's calling us to do, and to be better men in the seminary, better men, more sacrificial, more loving, and a deeper thought or prayer life. And that's really cool to see that in other men. So
yeah, no, that's great. So you get your bachelor's, you get your master's. So the picture getting a little clearer on where you want this to go or what you want to do.
Yeah, and for me, it was clear from the Lord. I'm here to be a servant for Him and for His glory. And so, as I got done with college, that calling to continue to be a priest, I had discerned pretty heavily. Can I be a celibate man without a wife and kids and be happy? And I found in following priests and seeing their life and living in the summer at a parish, and having great examples of priesthood in my own childhood, and parish priests. I said, like, just because they don't have a wife and kids doesn't mean they're bachelors,
Right.
And they don't have responsibility or can't love. As a matter of fact, it really means that they are available to love in that generous way of everyone. And I joke with my brothers. I say, you've got one wife that you're so blessed. I have all your wives, to deal with, to talk to help, mostly understand you, and it's like, so there's perks to every relationship, and it was just, I guess, that was the definitive thing is my heart ready to make this leap and this commitment that I can be happy and I can still be impactful, joyful, while not having a family and kids. And so the spiritual family became even more important, and seeing the church as a bride. We hear those tones in Scripture all the time, and Jesus being the bridegroom. And so as a priest, now you're configured in a ritual way, but also for Catholics, we believe in an ontological. So, like, the core of my being is Jesus Christ. As a priest, I'm ordained to be that. I'm no longer even myself. I'm to die and to let Christ be there and take all of the things that are good in me and do what the Lord wants. So studying the theology of the church from a Catholic viewpoint and a lens and interpretation. Was just opening up once again all the graces I knew in 8th grade, in freshman year at that retreat. Now I could put language to it. Now I can talk about it. It's just, being in a moment of, that prayer life deepening and deepening, over 10 years to create these habits where like what my dad and mom, this is how they prayed. This is what they did. Now it was starting to take shape in my life. Like, this is how the morning goes. This is how the evening goes.
Yeah.
And so the building blocks that even now, being 7 years out of seminary and a priest, I'm still building, still growing, but those fundamental blocks are non-negotiable things in my life now that I'm grateful for. Yeah.
So you take that next step.
Mm-hmm.
You take that next step to say, okay, I want to be a priest. That's a big deal.
It is. Yeah.
Especially, you're a man,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted a wife and kids. At one point
Mm-hmm.
in time, you had thought about maybe you want a wife and kids, but now you've made that decision and you're
Mm-hmm.
at peace with it. I want to become a priest.
Yeah.
What does that process look like after you go through all that schooling? How much time does it take to go through that?
Yeah. So really we're discerning all through college or your bachelor's so that could be anywhere from 2 to 4 years. Working with different guys in there, if they had a degree and then came to seminary later, God called them later. So we, it's always adjustment, 2 to 4 years. And then what we call it's called admission to candidacy for the priesthood. That is when the bishop comes and these men stand up in front of him and make a kind of a commitment. I call it the promise ring.
Yeah.
It's the promise ring of, I am going to study to be a priest. Now, you can leave at any moment, until you are ordained, right? Once that's done, that's a final deal. So there's steps along the way, and that admission to candidacy, the funny story, and then the real story is, the funny story is, up until that moment in seminary, we're all wearing ties and suits, and so the night before that admission to candidacy, we all bring our ties together and we cut the ties, because the next day we begin to wear Roman collars and look like priests after candidacy.
Yeah.
So I do remember that day because you change your clothes, it's like, well, black's my color now, black and the white collar, and that's what I'm wearing.
Yeah.
So it's like, all these ties or, these long sleeve shirts that you have, you open the cover and it's like, yep, that's my wardrobe. So even that, kind of like a religious, habit, if you see like a monk, like that's their habit. It was a visible sign of the invisible reality that's going on in my calling and my response. Is I'm now being single and wholeheartedly dedicated to this purpose. And I'm open to discern this in a very intense way. And so there's other steps along the way that kind of get you closer to the Word of God, and then to the altar, of serving there at the altar, and then ultimately to the moment of being ordained a transitional deacon, so one of service, first and foremost. And then after a year of doing that, then to be ordained a priest for eternity. So
Yeah, that's a big deal, and certainly glad that you went through that process and made that decision, because there's no doubt that you've had an impact on my family's life just in the short time we've known each other in 5 years, and that's just my family, not alone all the other families. So grateful for you. Yeah. Making that decision, and I know, because we have conversations, that it's not been easy.
No, yeah.
And there's many challenges along the road, just like there is in running a business or raising a family, coaching a sports team. There's always challenges along the way, and you've certainly seen those. So a question I have always had, so as a priest, and you're listening to confessions.
Sure.
How hard is it? Because I'm sure you've heard some things where you're just like, whoa. How do you let that go and not hold on to that? Or is that something that's not possible to do?
Yeah, so I always say, forgiveness only comes about through Jesus Christ and his sacrifice on the cross. And every time you look at a priest in the confessional, it's not a comfortable chair. We call it the hot box. We call it the hot seat, whatever you want to call it. People probably sweating in there because they're, letting their whole life out. And it is up to the priest to judge if a person is contrite, if a person truly has an intention of amending their life. and doing the penance. Like that is, the priest is the judge of that, because Christ said, whatever sins you bind will be bound, whatever sins you loose will be loosed. As he gave the gift of the Holy Spirit to the apostles then give that to each and every priest. At my ordination, that gift was imparted to me. That's a responsibility. But it is Christ who works in me to forgive. And that's why, we sit there and we got to judge, we got to do that. But I remember at a retreat for high schoolers in my junior year of college. It was down in Cincinnati, and there was a priest, Father David Doseck. He's still a priest in our diocese. And I asked him the very similar question. I said, Father, how do you handle the big ones? How do you handle, like, I just killed someone?
Yeah.
And he just looked at me and he said, nah, you don't want to focus on the sins. Those will get you. And he said, that entire time that you're at confessional, you want to be focused on what is happening. God's mercy is now redeeming. His blood is washing out these sins. And he said, as they reveal, you're aware of it, you're holding the tension like the cross, and you're discerning, is this person truly accepting grace in this moment? And he says, if you keep focusing on grace and the power of God's forgiveness in that sacrament, like you'll never exhaust that. And then he said, if you focus on sin, it's boring. It's repetitive. It always ruins.
Yeah.
It destroys.
Yeah.
It never gives anything other than ugly. But if you look on the grace, it's different. It's attractive. It's transformative. And you got to see that. You got to be intentionally looking for that.
Yeah.
So that I've taken that on myself as well, as when I get into that hot box, I got a responsibility. I got to judge here. If this person is really open to God's grace and like the Lord, that threshold, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. So it's always erring on the side of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Wishing the best, seeing the best in another, because that's how our Heavenly Father is desiring that moment. Luke chapter 15 with the lost coin or the prodigal son, or the sheep that goes out. Like he's going to go that far to bring someone back. And I am now being called to be one with God in this moment of forgiveness. And so it's a challenge and a gift at the same time. Yeah.
What was your parents' reaction when you made that final decision to say, hey, I want to be a priest?
Sure, yeah. I mean, my mom was shocked when I said it in high school. It was only like a year after that retreat or whatever. So I told her that, and then it was surprising because a priest ordained for Cincinnati lived on our same block in Botkins. So we're famous because we have 3 priests from this block around the church. I don't know if that's a record or whatever, but it's a credit to the people of God and their prayers, probably more than anything. But he had just become the vocations director for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. And so I told my mom, and she's just like, okay, well, and she just wanted to be helpful for me, like if you're interested in a college, like let's go visit or let's see this thing. So I'm walking home from school the next day, and Father Kyle Schnippel is there on my front porch. And I love just what my mom did. She just, she's just like, I don't know, he's hearing something from the Lord, and just talk to him and do whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
And I really don't remember the conversation, but I just remember the words of Father Kyle. He said, this is a normal thing to be called by God. And for me, with a high school and all these friends that I had, left in this world, and they were seeking other things, but I did have a group of Christian friends. It was like, it was normalizing something that seemed so extraordinary. And even in Catholicism, when you say you want to be a priest or you want to be religious, they hold you up on a pedestal. It's like, well, he's the salvation of the world now. And I'm like, I'm a 16-year-old guy thinking the Lord wants something of me and not having it all together right here.
Yeah.
As I look back, that's absolutely what it was. And I value my parents so much because they never treated me differently. They held me accountable I still had temper tantrums and got into arguments and said some horrible things even after hearing the call to be a priest. And, and that's, my parents knew that, but they still loved me through it. But it was just fascinating to know that, like, this is a normal thing. And even to this day, I tell all the, young men that are interested in ministry or something, I say, it's a normal thing to actually discern ministry. Mm-hmm. And even in your vocation of being married or family life, the Lord can still put these things on your heart because, everybody, I think, has a gift and a talent that they need to bring to the Lord and to help others for the building of the kingdom. And so, for some it's ordained ministry, and others it's ministry in various kinds or ways. So, they were shocked and, what do I say, so supportive, all the time, supportive in this. And they never treated me differently. My brothers and sisters never treated me differently. They always
good and bad. Right?
Exactly. They're always good for that. They'd always, even to this day, I come in party. Oh, there's the priest guy. There he is. So they're
chosen one. Right?
Exactly. They do harp on that a little bit. It cracks me up. It's like, yep. So it's a fun thing, and we always joke. Just to tell you the support of my mom and dad and everything, I love this story. It's a little one, but, I got ordained a priest May 20th, 2017. And like a month later, I'm coming back home, and Mom has all my brothers there because I was assigned in Cincinnati. So all my brothers are there, and they're painting my room that I had at the house. And Mom did not change anything from when I left. And it had been 10 years of studying. And Mom did not change anything. And, we were joking about it and everything. And Mom said, well, I wanted you to know that you always had a place in case this didn't work out.
Yeah, that's great.
And to have that freedom, you know what I mean? And even for a Catholic, where they're like, I'm so happy that you're being a priest. Like, I'm so honored by it. You're going to do wonderful things. Mom always, it was just that if you think this is too much and you want to get out, you got a place. And then the flip side that's funny about it is then my brothers, they said, we didn't know if he was ordained until Mom really painted the room.
That was the moment.
I was like, you were there at the ordination? Like, yeah, but we didn't know until Mom changed the room. We were like, oh, something happened to Father David. So we crack up all the time about that.
That's great. So all these positive influences, this support from your family and your parents, there had to have been some negative. Was there people who were saying, why would you do that? Why, kind of talk about that and how you worked through some of those.
So we just live in a highly relativistic culture. And so your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. And so that was what I was encountering all the time. It wasn't until I actually got to be ordained a priest that there's more, kind of attacks and things like that in regards to the philosophical, theological, or personal and moral choices that I make in life and stand for. But at that moment in time, there's just like this openness and broadness that you can really choose to do and be whoever you want. And so I didn't really encounter anything. If anything, it was, that's weird.
Yeah.
Or that's not the normal thing that people do.
Right.
And then the compliment was, it kind of fits my trajectory and what was happening for me. The hardest part for me was discerning, marriage or family in the environment of seminary where there's no women.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I had to work out a deal with the four majors to just say, hey, can I go down to Ohio State campus a few times and just have some experiences?
Yeah.
Because I'm 19 years old, and they were generous in letting me do that. I had some, be back for prayer time or this, but they were generous in working with me in that moment. But yeah, I don't know if I ever really faced the criticism, or perhaps because when you're in that formation, there is kind of a bubble, a protection, if you will.
Yeah.
Here's the brotherhood, we're going forward, and then once you get out into the world changed from being relativistic to now maybe antithetical to a Christian kind of basis of things in certain areas.
Yeah.
And so that that now has been an interesting kind of grab. I was like, well, these same people were telling me, yeah, do you, and then now I'm doing me. I'm being what I'm called to be, and that's not acceptable. So that was the interesting thing, was going into seminary, finding this life, coming out then after 10 years, because that's significant, a decade.
Yeah.
And the world's different.
Absolutely.
This is different, but, we've been trained with a timeless philosophy, a timeless theology, but that doesn't, rubber doesn't hit the road right away. You got to work it out, make sure everything's okay. And so those first years of being a priest, and still to this day, I'm learning, so much about where we're at. So.
Yeah. And I think that's why, when you hear negativity about the Catholic Church, I think a lot of it has to do with how rigid the church is, because it goes all the way back to Jesus' teachings. Yeah. And there's not a compromise or a change to move towards, certain thoughts or beliefs just because the world and the times are changing. The Catholic Church is going to stay the same. So I think that's where a lot of the negativity and, a lot of people talk down about the church is, well, why don't you change? Why don't you let females be priests? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? So kind of talk about that a little bit, about the faith itself and some of the misconceptions that people have. I truly think, I wasn't raised Catholic. I was raised in the UCC as a Protestant. Okay. Good. As a Christian, went to the University of Dayton, a Catholic school. I never went to a Catholic mass during school. Sure. And met my wife, and that's kind of where I decided I was going to become Catholic. She was very strong in her faith. So as I've learned about the faith and come to more of an understanding of the faith, and I see all this negativity towards the church or towards priests or towards this or towards that, it's like, this is it. The world is constantly changing through social media, through news, through politics, but the church doesn't. And that's why it gets attacked, in my opinion. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there's a famous saying, I heard it at a retreat last year. It says, the world changes, but the cross stands firm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I think there's common experiences among all people, but what we specifically believe as Christians in general, and then Catholics maybe in particular, Christians in general, is that we're a belief based upon revelation, that the God reveals himself through the scriptures and through encounters with people, and specifically the scriptures, right? And then, he founds a church to interpret those scriptures. And so there's this sacred deposit of faith given at that moment when Jesus is on earth. There's no fuller revelation that God can give, until we see him face to face. And so with the institution of the church, like the Old Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, and the 12 tribes, the 12 apostles, and we see this now in Acts of the Apostles and all the letters in the New Testament of the Holy Spirit sanctifying and giving these gifts like Jesus. Now Paul does the same thing, or like Jesus, Peter does the same thing. And then he continues to grow the church in this mission of evangelizing the world, just like what Israel was supposed to be for the world. Now Jesus comes, redeems Israel from all of its misconceptions of a Messiah. Instead of, it's now the suffering one who offers his body and blood for the redemption of the world. In him, everything is restored and hope is given. So in regards to that, that's it. The cross will always stand firm as the world changes, because that's the fullest of revelation that can be possible, God himself becoming one of us, which is a radical belief, a radical claim that most other religions will not worship a God, because to become human is to become weak, to become something of like you and I, right? So the mystery of who Jesus is in the revelation of the scriptures is still a powerful concept, because the cross itself means nothing without the one who's on it. And he takes that, transforms it, brings it into new life. And so in a particular way for Catholics then, what we believe is that sacred deposit is not ours to mess with, to use, or to say, I'm not going to believe this, I'm only going to believe this part of it. we call it cafeteria Catholics. You're gonna choose what you want and then not choose this thing. And that was hard for me personally, because there's a lot of things that the church does teach in regards to morality that is very organic, if the term today in the world is green,
Yeah.
In regards to sexuality, it's very biblical.
Yeah.
And very much this is what was revealed, and this is what has happened, even though the culture and different things might be defining new realities of relationships and even identities. That revelation of Jesus and the revelation of the scriptures in the Old and New Testament, for a person who's a Christian believer and Catholic, that is still true. And none of what's happening negates that. If anything, it's now an experience where that truth of revelation now encounters the realities that people are facing today with new identities, new definitions of relationships. And so that's what I believe, is that truth still speaks to the reality of where we are. Just like Babel, no matter how far you go, the Lord's even closer than what we think. And so there's a permissive will of God to let the world or let these things happen, because God knows. His truth is eternal. He knows that this is what they're seeking. And he's so gentle and loving and willing to let that happen because we have free will. He created us with free will. Mm-hmm. He created us, that's unique, created us with the ability to give him the middle finger and turn the other way.
Yeah.
I don't know of anybody that would do that and do it with love, or create something that would do that with. Parenting is probably the closest I see, is just like, the love, but eventually there's going to be a moment where I have to be free as a parent, that they're going to walk away from me.
Yeah.
And I can't control that. I've done everything I can to make sure that they're successful or prepared for their decision.
Yeah.
And the consequences of it. So there's a little reflection of God's love there in everything that we have as parents especially. But yeah, as far as the negativity, I'd sit there and say some is warranted. Yeah, I mean, it's a church. It's full of people. Wherever there's people, there's sin. Yeah. And there's grace as well. And I always sit there and say, it's like, well, if a first grade teacher does something bad, does that make first grade bad? No. But we are, in the Catholic Church, so if a priest does something bad and horrible, is that bad? Yes, but the priesthood isn't bad.
Right.
And so those ideals of striving for holiness are still there, and God does call, and we're held to a higher accountability. And so that's in the church, with the sex scandals and abuse scandals. Rightly so. I think Bishop Barron says it's a purifying time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It needed to be pruned.
Yeah.
We needed people to step in to what was an unhealthy culture of brotherhood and hiding and secrets and things. And the light of the Holy Spirit brought that to light. Those victims need to be paid and, given as much care as they deserve.
Yeah.
The church has to own up to that as it can and put in standards. So I went through at least, 4 psychological tests before I even got to seminary.
Yeah.
And so the vetting process is high. But again, we just had a recent issue in Cincinnati with a seminarian. And so it's not foolproof. But now we've got checks and balances that we can sit there and catch.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that somebody being called to the priesthood is this or is automatically having these things.
Yeah.
And that's the point that I always sit there and I say, if we can do this out in the public with public schools and different things, we got to treat it here. But there is this warranted thing of we're called to a higher standard in some ways.
Yeah.
And how to do that well. And I think we've done well. But yeah, the misconceptions of the church and kind of this, I have found personally of just being social and talking to people, all of a sudden their misconceptions melt because it's just another human person.
Right.
And they may have a different experience in this, and I'll learn from them. But, just grabbing a beer at the bar and talking to them, and I'm in my collar, and what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
And then it's just, it's a great relationship, and I love being a priest. It's who I am. I want to bring them to Christ and that, but it's always through just organic friendship and being who you are. And eventually they'll ask the question that I saw when I was in 8th grade, like, why are you so joyful? Why are you different? Like, what is it that determines your life to do this? And it's, I wake up and I have this purpose that's more than just here, so.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is for Ben. So, Ben, you're not Catholic. I don't know how much you know about the faith, but I'm curious, do you have any questions for Father David that you can think of, or that, maybe you've always wanted to ask a Catholic priest why you do this, or why, I mean, is there anything like that you can think of?
No, kind of just, honestly, just sitting back, kind of learning about the Catholic. I mean, I've been to Catholic funerals before. Like,
Okay.
I've had families that, I know those are always longer.
Yeah.
And,
Depends on the preacher. Yeah.
right, exactly. And but no, I mean, honestly, I feel like, it seems like every side of religion and everything, people have their, beliefs and stuff like that about it. For a while, my wife and I, we kind of hopped churches, and when we did, it was also kind of, we tried out Pentecostal. That was our first one that we went to, and there I could see like quite a bit of difference. In Catholic church, my grandma, she's Catholic, so we've been to hers, and you can see kind of, but it's all the same teachings almost, besides the different, I guess you would say, kind of the different protocols, the different. So how do you look at it as like a priest, like the different Assembly of Gods and stuff like that? How do you see them?
Yeah. So we have a wonderful teaching in our church where, Jesus Christ is the sole mediator between God and man. And that's it. It's in the person of Jesus Christ as both the Son of God and Son of man. He's the one we find salvation in. I think if we go back to our early creedal statements of the Apostles' Creed, we'll find that we don't disagree on anything, actually. Over time and with history, and that's it, learning the history and why certain churches were founded for just reasons or unjust reasons. And the question then becomes, John chapter 20, I desire that they all be one. And so what does that really mean? So at the Second Vatican Council for Catholics, they started to meditate on that, pray on that. And what they gave was kind of this image of like a wheel and the spokes. And that Jesus is the truth. He's the way, the truth, and the life. And then it branches out from there in all its various forms and philosophical forms or theological forms, praxis, like how they do that. But we're all on that journey, if you will, journeying closer and closer to the source, to the source of life. And I think it's just a beautiful thing, like even Muslims or even our Jewish brothers and sisters, like they're a spoke, of truth. And probably for them, and this is where the respect comes in dialogue, for them, their Jesus in the center looks like this.
Right.
And then for others, their Jesus looks like this. And that's where I hope the conversation actually comes to is, let's look at our definitions of the Lord from a scripture, from a history, and from our lived experience of the reality of grace. Like, how do we interact with this?
Right.
Instead, we get caught up in this practice or that practice or this specific teaching, and rightly so, But we can't really have an engaging dialogue about those specific things until we actually get the essential thing right.
Right.
And that's hard. It's hard to have those conversations.
Yeah. I always found it funny because for a while, we went to a Christian Life Center up in Dayton.
Yeah.
And then we go to First Baptist Church in Lebanon, and everyone's like, wow, like what was the big change? And it's
sure.
Honestly, like you go sit during a sermon, I can't tell you any difference.
The format
and everything.
Sure,
it's
sure.
like, everything's about being the hands and feet of Jesus. Jesus died for you. Jesus forgave your sins. And so I was always interested in kind of what the bigger picture was, or not maybe the bigger picture, but the perception, from higher ups were.
And that was it for me, was just like, is their teaching actually sound and based in Bible and history, and then the morality of it, it doesn't change just with the time. It sticks. It's got a little power behind it.
Right.
And it challenges the modern notions of the gift of the human body and who we're created to be. And so I found in Catholicism, and other faiths too, we might actually agree on stuff, but I found in Catholicism the most full form of that teaching. But there's many things in prayer. Like for me, I love praise and worship music.
Right.
We do not do that well in some areas of the Catholic Church. All right, we're still the old hymnals, baby.
Right.
And I sit there and I go, man, I just wish, And I'm blessed now. I've got a wonderful musician at an 8 p.m. mass, and her voice is beautiful, and she can do all these songs, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm just like, yeah. I feel and know God's grace through these songs.
Right.
So I'm blessed. I'm blessed with that. But it's like, for me, I'm not going to change my faith just because of that song.
Right.
To me, it's more the history, this and that. And then I sit there and I say, it doesn't have to be an either or. Can it be a both and here? I want Catholicism, I want all this, and I also want this praise and worship. Let's see how we can bring this together.
Right.
And now we're rubbing up against some of those formats
right.
that have been the usual formats of
Yeah.
things, and that's difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah, and it's funny too. Some of the biggest complaints. My wife, she worked in the church for a while, and some of the biggest complaints they'd get is about the music. Right?
Oh yeah.
Is the music too loud? Is it? What are we singing? Why are we doing this? We miss having the orchestra there. Why now do we just have drums and guitars and piano and every Father's Day, which is this weekend, we always have like bluegrass band that would come in at First Baptist, and they'd play, like I Saw the Lion, like all these different ones. And it's like, why can't they just be that? That's what, and I don't know. It's just really funny because the music is, and it's like, okay, why are we here? What are we living for? And that's the big thing. And
that is.
Yeah, I don't know. That was always one of my biggest questions.
Yeah, I think it's a hard discussion, but it's also we got many opportunities where we probably agree on all 12 articles of the creed. And it's like, let's talk about that, what we know about the Lord, have that conversation. And that can be many years. It could be 50 years talking about that.
Right.
I think of like Chesterton and C.S. Lewis, some guys in England, and they, we know them by like their Orthodoxy and Chronicles of Narnia. Mm-hmm. Well, they'd sit, smoke a pipe, and talk about faith the entire time. Chesterton became Catholic. C.S. Lewis did not. Mm-hmm. But you start to see in his writings about, John chapter 6, about the bread of life discourse, there's notions where there's actually a physical change that takes place,
Right.
But he wasn't willing to move towards maybe a Catholic belief in the Eucharist. But he was pondering in his writings and in his heart what the truth of Jesus is. Mm-hmm. And at that level, he felt, this is where I am on that journey towards the source.
Right.
And Chesterton said, I'm at this part, but we're all journeying towards it. So
yeah.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
And that's something that I feel like for like Christianity as a whole is a big thing, is like, where are the different places you can meet people on their journeys? You talked about drinking a beer at a bar with somebody, and I've heard many people talk about, I can't tell you, we were sitting around the bonfire there night having a drink, and then we brought up, faith, and then that's where people got saved at, and it's just like, but I thought alcohol was bad and all this, and it's like, it's where people are out on the journey, and I don't know. I feel like there's such a misconception around the whole thing.
No, yeah. And Ben, you brought up a great thing, which is, what we're trying as Catholics is with evangelization and the laity or the people in the pews, I see this, they're at a bonfire, they're this. They lead somebody through being saved.
Right.
Right there at the bonfire.
Right.
Catholics will usually say, I'll call Father on Monday.
Right.
And you can talk to him.
Right.
You know what I mean? If it's all going through this one funnel, Jesus, we're never going to get him out there.
Right.
So it's a both and cooperation for Catholics. We got to learn to do it a little bit better. I don't think most of my Protestant brothers and sisters say, let me go talk to the lead pastor of the church and we'll see how you become saved.
Right.
Like I really see a beautiful thing of most people. They believe that's their personal mission.
Right. And
they have a way of doing it, whatever it is. And so Catholics, we're trying to train people to like, just say it.
Right.
Just do it. Just say, do you know Jesus? And you may not be able to explain to them everything about Jesus, but what's been your encounter?
Right.
And what's your witness? And through that, the grace will work. And all you have to do is the basic lines, maybe from the letter to the Romans, of he came to us, he suffered, he died. do you accept that, and do you want to change your life?
Right.
And I'll walk with you as we go to church and learn the Bible, and we'll be a disciple kind of group together, walking 2 by 2. So
Yeah.
And for Catholics, it's like, well, I'm gonna call Father.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if we keep doing this funnel, there's not too many fathers out there, priests. That's what I mean. Not too many priests out there anymore, because the numbers are dwindling, and I see that too. It's like, if that's our model,
Right.
then it's going to dwindle and dwindle. So I think there's going to be a great fire of that relationship, and just listening to that, be like, wow, some people were saved. Could we do that as Catholics as well?
Right.
But yes,
Yes.
you can.
Yeah.
So
And you're not talking about like, oh, you know what? Let me take you out here in the water.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we would need to call a
Right,
priest for that.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's not what we're talking about right now. Like,
I always crack up, because in our Catholic faith, lay people can baptize.
Right.
They can, but it's in danger of death.
oh,
So it's normally the ordinary minister is a priest or a deacon,
Right.
Who's been set apart for that sacred ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be danger of death. So I'm like, either A, you were dunking somebody and drowning them, and then you had to baptize them, which is on you, okay? Or something else happened. So there's some things like the sacraments, but it's that ordered process, and it's
Right.
like, okay, we have this relationship, but if we want to have the living waters of salvation and baptism, we go to a more elevated, sacred
Exactly.
moment.
And that's yeah.
And that's true with the other church.
Yeah.
There has to be at least a minister or some representative of that church, typically, to do the baptism.
Yep.
To ensure that we're following the Bible. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and that's how you're baptized.
Right.
And if that can be guaranteed, then we try to have a written record of it, and
Yeah.
when it'd take place, because that's a day your life changes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the day the heavens are opened, as we hear with Jesus in the baptism of Jordan.
Yeah.
And this is my beloved child, with whom I'm well pleased. And that's what the Father speaks to each of us, in the grace of the Spirit and Jesus being one with us in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And-
To lead towards it is, we're more, I think, more functionary right now as a Catholic school system, church system, versus more relational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I don't know. And, when you mentioned it earlier about saying, I believe you said, the way I'm like the way you're living, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody, asked me about the way I'm living, or what's making you different, what's bringing the joy, like when you went to the high school. And I think that that's something that all of us should strive for, right?
Yeah.
Like if you are a Christian, we have so many like different misconceptions, so many different views of all of us, right? The same thing with like what you said with the priesthood. There's bad, we're out of a bunch of people, there's going to be bad eggs out of all of them. It's the same thing with Christianity. And the same thing, I feel like some people might, go out and just look at the negativity, right?
Sure.
Well, you're going to hell because you're doing this. You're going to hell for doing this. And it's like, why don't we more come around to that relational side of things? Live your life the way that you want, other people to, live the life with that joy that Jesus gives you, the freedom, without the burden that we talk about. Like Jesus died on the cross for our sins, for our burden. So
Jesus didn't come to condemn the world; He came to save it.
Exactly.
And to be of service. And then we're imitating Christ in that. Like, I could condemn this person right now.
right.
Or maybe God has sent me here with my full reason and ability to see Him going on a path of destruction.
Right.
Quote, like my mother, get to a retreat.
Yeah.
Right. How can I get them to start thinking more about their life than what's captured their heart now? They're made for so much more.
Right.
Because I am, and they are, and it's how do I get to that?
Right.
For each person, it's that journey. It's,
Exactly.
what works for them is not going to work for somebody else, and so
Right.
it's a blessed thing to be in discipleship with people, or to go seek people's hearts and see where they are, because it's just a fascinating thing where their journey is, and it's as simple as asking, how'd you get here, and what's your life look like? That deep type of conversation, takes some time with other shallower conversations to get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one question I have, when you come up through the priesthood and you're ordained and you get your first church,
Yeah.
which happens to be, your first
Pastorate,
church.
yeah, pastorate
First
and all that,
pastor
yep.
is here in Preble County.
That's right, in Eaton. Yep.
In Eaton.
Yeah.
You have this vision of what it's going to be like.
Sure.
What the priesthood is going to be like. I've got my own church, my congregation. I'm going to be the leader.
Mm-hmm.
What was way different than what you thought?
Yeah, so one of the things, I really thought, okay, when I show up, it'll be like a team, and I'll step into this and, hear advice here, and then together we're going to just make this great decision and move things forward. And over time I realized, like, there's good voices, there's bad voices, but it's me. I have to lead this in the name of Christ, and I can't just be what is comfortable to me, which is to be, on the same lines with people and just, kind of from behind going here. And that's consistently been a call from the Lord, is how to be out front, how to be that leader out front. And that's not, my parents and here and my upbringing, it's always be humble, be simple, just serve and go forward. And in particular with, critical needs or, physical, spiritual, kind of revitalization of things, it takes somebody who's willing to go into the wilderness and say, this is a vision. I know people can't see it, but we're going to go there.
Yeah.
And so I'm still growing in that. And in my first pastorate here, it was very much, a blessing of both. It's a, small parishes, so you can get that experience, fail a number of times and be successful sometimes. But it's about those relationships that you can create with people, and then, test all these things, retain what is good, and refrain from what isn't going to lead to the kingdom or lead to the benefit. You can drop that opinion or, okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's not the direction I want to be going in.
Right.
If you'd like to be a part of this is where we're going, invite you into that. So, I thought it would be more collaborative. Maybe that's the best way, because I didn't want so much pressure on me.
Right.
And then I realized more and more collaboration still doesn't take away.
No.
I'm the one at the end of the day that's the father and the priest, and I have to step up as the head of my household and make a decision, and hopefully I've done everything I can to be as listening of an ear and a heart. But it's tough sometimes. And the other thing is, like, it's a blessing when you make those tough decisions, because some people don't say anything until you make a decision.
Right.
And then they give you their thoughts, either negative or positive,
Yeah.
One of those things, you make a decision, like, well, yeah, we knew you were going to do this the whole time. And I was like, and you just sat there? And you didn't say
give me some
anything?
support.
Didn't
Yeah.
give me support? No,
Yeah.
no thumbs up, nothing? You just sat there with your arms crossed the whole time. I'm like, how am I supposed to interpret that?
Right. That's the
You
the burden of leadership,
Yeah.
or those challenges.
Yeah, kind of the stoic people out there, for various reasons.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, okay. And then others are more vocal on a positive or more vocal on a negative. And so it's learning in leadership, like, that's a family, that's a parish, that's a congregation, group of people. But yeah, collaboration still means, you're going to have to step up as a leader and make the decisions. And that was something I learned out here.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're gonna try to land this plane here, but
Okay, sure.
I want to I want you to think back throughout your life. Who has made the biggest impact in your life beyond Jesus? An actual person that led you down a path, and maybe it's someone we've already talked about. Maybe
Sure.
there's someone out there, but the first person you think of when you think of, this is where my life changed. This is where this is the individual who led me to become a priest.
Mm-hmm.
Who's that person for you?
Yeah, you took away my Jesus one. So, because for me it is real. It is. He's just as much a person as anything else. But so if I could, if that's taken away, then we'll respect that. Yeah, I definitely, my mom and dad. My mom and dad, from a fundamental viewpoint, like one flesh. They're united in that sacrament of holy matrimony. And they're together in what they do. They're not perfect. But just, as I get older, even 34, looking back, I'm just like, man, that was a blessing. They really
Yeah.
stuck it out. They had 37 years of marriage, and Dad passed away 5 years ago now. And just seeing, the blessings that were there, the words that were gentle, and I don't know about you guys, but I have a mixture of their weaknesses and a mixture of their strengths.
Absolutely.
And that's something that's like not only in my DNA, but in how I interact with God and the world. And so it's like a combination of both of them now being lived in me, and I have the responsibility to be me and what God is calling me to be. And so to stretch in the weaknesses and to enjoy the strengths as gifts that have been given. Statistical study after study, no one has a more impact than a mother and a father on a person's life.
Yeah.
Even a teacher that steps in, it's always in regards to those roles that would be like a mother or a father, that steps in those moments. And so, I take that on too as a priest. I don't have biological children, but when they come to the Lord, people need someone of a church leader who has that same type of parenting pastoral skill. And I believe the Lord's given me that gift and opened my heart to receive it from Him. It's His love being poured out through me, my weaknesses and my strengths. And I see it. I see it in the community that, I led the churches here for 4.5 years. And so I started to see like how I typically do things. People are starting to, say the same, or the way I approach it, there's a comfortability here. And it's, it's just like, it's like a family.
Yeah.
They pick up on the tone that the leader sets, and then they make it their own.
Yeah. I think as I look back, I'm 10, 11 years older than you are, and you talk about, the strengths and those weaknesses you pick up from your parents, and the older that I get, I really see that. I really see, my dad will say something, or he'll do something, or my mom will say something, and I'll do something, and I'll be like, okay, that's where I get that.
Yeah.
And that's where I get that. And so that's a unique thing as you get older and as you mature in life and you have different experiences. You see how those strengths and those weaknesses that your parents have. They're human.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so that's a unique thing. So knowing that we've got all kinds of different listeners. I mean, we're pretty big time, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Like 400 people.
Eight episodes? This is the eighth, maybe?
We're big. We're
hitting it
big
big now.
We're getting there. What's one final piece of advice you can leave our listeners? A piece of advice someone's given you that you carry with you on a daily basis when you're down in the dumps. I know you've been through. You're human just like we are. You have good days. You have bad days. You have days where you don't want to get out of bed. Yeah. You have days where you want to go run 4 miles because you have so much strength and you feel so good. So what's one piece of advice you can leave someone listening to this that they can take with them on their daily battles?
Sure. I'd probably say 2 things at this moment in my life, so maybe 2 pieces of advice. One would be asking for help doesn't make you less of a leader. It makes you more leadership quality. And I've had to learn that. Asking for help actually makes you a better leader. The greatest leaders are the ones who keep learning, and they don't have it all. And they're striving for something, and along the way they bring people with them. So it's that ask, hey, I need help doing this. I can't lead a church on my own. God, I need your help. People, I need your help. Salvation of the world is not on David Doseck. So, asking for help doesn't make you less of a leader. It makes you a greater leader. And then the other advice, there was a priest on retreat a year ago, and, I've gone through a lot of change in the last, half year and things, so it's been very challenging for me. And the advice that he gave, and it's ring true in my prayer every time, and I don't like it, but it's true, is God's going to do something in you far more powerful than what he'll do through you. And so there's something in you that is always being renewed by God because he loves you, as a person. He doesn't love you because of what he can get out of you or what you can do for him. And it's just a reminder of that, and that's true. And the most challenging times in the last probably 6 months have been doubting that or not feeling that in the way that I used to feel it. And that's the Lord once again doing something in me that's far more powerful than what he had been doing through me for 4.5 years of being a pastor. So it's a big change, and I'm, you got all these things in your heart and your mind as you grow and you mature, and you just got to be attentive to your whole body and your whole health, and sit there and say, okay, what do I need in this moment? And thanks be to God, keeping prayer, good friends, a circle of friends, it's all there to make sure that you're focused on what is God doing in me versus just through me or through my work.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. And I know you're in the middle of a storm right now and going through some challenges, and I appreciate our friendship.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
appreciate what you've done for our small community with our church, because I know that wasn't easy either. But I think you recognize that all those different experiences that you went through here and that you're going through now are going to make you that much more stronger, that much better of a man and of a priest, even though when you're going through it, that's really hard to see. So we appreciate you coming up from Cincinnati, and spending an hour or so with us
thanks.
to be on the podcast. And
Yeah, it was great.
when we were going through different episodes, I was like, Father David's got to be one of our first ones on here, because you have so much to offer, so much to give. You're when I grew up in the Protestant faith, and my mom was Catholic, she was raised Catholic. I always looked at the Catholic faith as like, you're so rigid, and like it was just not welcoming as a kid. But you really helped to change that for me, because we can have a beer together. We can sit on the front porch and talk about business. We can talk about life in general. So I know it's challenging, but you're in the right spot, and I think you know that.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah,
and
I think so too. Yeah,
you just got to keep going. We talk about it almost on every episode about drops in the bucket, just a little bit every day. Just keep going. Keep taking that next step. So appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate spending time and getting the podcast.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not the last time you're on.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'll be in the background another time. Who knows? Yeah. So we'll see. Yeah, but
yeah. Well, thanks again, and we appreciate everybody listening again this week. We'll be back again next week with another episode, and go out and be tempered. Thank you for listening to the Be Tempered podcast. Please be sure to follow our show, to like, and to share with your friends or family. Thank you for listening, and go out and be tempered.